Welcome to Oh My Menses, a digital space dedicated to all things menstruality, periods, hormones, and cycle-informed living. Join me, Karinda, naturopath and fertility educator, as we explore topics that we probably don't hear about enough. From stories of menarche, birth control, and common period problems to menstrual shame, sex, fertility, and the moon, if it's about the human female experience, I probably talk about it. This is a place of sharing, remembering, learning, and unlearning, where we come together and reclaim our cyclical power. So sit back, relax, let's all connect with our wombs, and remember our brilliant cyclical nature. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Oh My Menses. Thank you for being here. Today, I want to talk about something that the way it makes sense in my head to word it is resistance to rest. I want to talk about resistance to rest on a individual, on a societal and a cultural level. And I want to talk about how I think resistance to rest is actually one of the major causes of our period problems. But before I dive in, let's do a little cycle check-in. So I've got my phone next to me. I'm just going to check my app. And by the way, sorry, audio only today for any YouTube peeps. Sometimes just got to take the path of least resistance. So I am on day 27 today. I am well and truly in my luteal phase, so my inner autumn, and my waning moon energy. Now, this month, fun fact, for anyone who follows along on Instagram, I generally am a very diligent participant in practicing the symptothermal fertility awareness method. That I will absolutely and happily delve into all the nuance and nooks and crannies of that topic in a different podcast. But for now, let's just summarize it with that involves me checking my basal body temperature every morning and cervical fluid daily in order to identify my fertile window. So I have a good idea of when I ovulate, and that helps me time intercourse, that helps me time honestly, like my whole schedule, and it gives me an idea of when my next period is going to arrive. That is much more useful information than what a period tracking app algorithm could provide me. If you're interested in learning more, hit me up. Anyway, so that's the method I usually practice. But something that's been going on for me lately is that I haven't been diligent or consistent with my temperature tracking. So I'm not confirming ovulation. So I've just been going by cervical mucus, which is also, when practiced in a slightly different way, is still a very valid form of a fertility awareness method called the Billings method. But yeah, it's leaving me, I guess not really, but a little bit in the dark in terms of I'm not super sure when my next period is arriving. I'm only kind of sure, which is still a lot better and feels a lot better than not knowing at all, I guess is what I mean to say. So that's where I'm at. And then we've also just had the new moon in Pisces yesterday. So I'm in waning moon energy. The Earth's moon is in new moon energy, so I'm feeling a little bit of a disconnect, but overall, like, feeling good, looking forward to, like, going into my menstrual cave for a bit. So with that said, have a little bit of a reflection on where you're at in your cycle. That's my invitation to you. What cycle day are you on? Do you know what phase you're in? Would you like to know what phase you're in? You can download my cycle tracking guide on my website, karindaholistics.com.au. Anyway, with that said, let's delve into today's topic. So the inspiration hit that I got to talk about this came from just a sort of off-the-cuff story that I posted to Instagram. And I say off the cuff, but also it wasn't just something that came to mind. It was something that has sort of been building up in my sphere lately because it's something that I'm observing a lot in my clients, friends, colleagues, wider to society. I'm seeing it being portrayed in media, and I was feeling the opposite of it. And so that's what I shared. And anyway, let me read out, it resonated with a lot of people. So I'm going to read out what I posted to my story and we'll go from there. Oh man, every time I second guessed, let's start that again, hey? Oh man, every time I second guess leaning into rest, surrender, or slowness, every time I think, am I going to get stuck here forever? Am I never going to feel active or feel flow again? And every single time I listen to my body, I lean in, I rest, and the thoughts follow. I'm lazy. I'm selfish. I'll never get anything done. I'll never be successful. I'm worthless to society. I rest anyway. And every single time, I am greeted and gifted with an unexpected surge of sustainable energy. My thinking is back on. My creativity is back on. I feel and sense my purpose, and I take action. This is the power of rest. And I know that this too doesn't last forever. Life is made up of cycles. We are cyclical. You are cyclical. And as I reread that out loud to myself, that's the first time I've read it out loud. Obviously I wrote it, but it can hit different when words are given some life in a vocal form. And I could just end the podcast right there and I feel like that would be enough. But yeah, so I was feeling blessed by my ability to rest, my question mark privilege to rest. I should have put the question mark after that word. My privilege question mark to rest. Is it a privilege? Is it a choice? I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And I was just feeling so grateful for having my awareness of menstrual cycles, menstrual cycle awareness, fertility awareness, and also just the cycles of nature and Earth's cycles. Because if I was still operating from a place of not acknowledging these cycles, I would probably still be in a place of consistently returning to burnout, consistently feeling tired or fatigued, consistently feeling like I had to hustle or work hard all the time or push through my body's cues and my body's messages to get things done or to quote unquote survive or to make money or, insert your prompt there. And that would probably create this picture for me of just probably not liking myself a whole lot, feeling at war with my body, feeling unaccepting of my body's truest nature. And I'm just so grateful for menstrual cycle awareness because this is one of the biggest gifts that it's given me. And it breaks my heart when I talk to clients or just other people that I know who are in that kind of phase of life that I described, where it's like there is burnout, there is chronic fatigue, they are hustling, they are pushing through their body's cues. And to a lot of these people, the idea of rest seems impossible. Yet, at the same time, so rest seems like not an option, slowing down seems like not an option, but every cycle or every month, they're experiencing pre-menstrual symptoms. They're experiencing mood swings, irritability, insatiable sugar cravings, changes to their body, breast tenderness, fluid retention, changes to their whole, honestly, you could say personality. They get brain fog, their cognition changes, how they interact socially changes, they have low self-esteem. And these are genuine symptoms that can appear in the premenstrual phase or in the luteal phase because of the hormonal changes that are happening, stemming from your ovaries, but mostly because of how those hormones from your ovaries communicate with the brain and influence your neurotransmitters. So absolutely a valid experience. But I see it at this point where it's chronic and people are saying that they can't rest, and then their period comes, and now, it's slightly different for everyone. Apologies for dog barking if you can hear that. Now, it's slightly different for everyone, but then when they get into their menstrual phase, it's also either likely that that the fatigue just takes a whole new level of severity where it's just so intense. Or they've got period pain, dysmenorrhea. They might have a chronic condition or an invisible illness like endometriosis, adenomyosis, or undiagnosed, pelvic inflammatory disease, or, any kind of pathology with or without a label, with or without a diagnosis, that causes their period to be incredibly uncomfortable. And from my clinicians and from my menstrual cycle enthusiast perspective, when I hear these stories, it feels really obvious to me. I'm just like, yeah, you're pushing yourself. You're pushing yourself, and your body's asking you to slow down. And I guess let's talk about resistance to rest in itself. Why is there a resistance to rest? How am I even observing this? What are my thoughts on it? It can come from a couple of angles. I think a lot of people have just been sort of trained, which is a sad word to use for this context, but I think valid. Trained from a young age to believe that they are lazy if they slow down or rest, if they don't have like a normal conventional job, part-time or full-time, working 5 days a week, or studying full-time, then they're not worthwhile to society. They're not contributing anything to society. So therefore, you're not worthy. You're not worthy unless you work hard, unless you keep yourself busy. So I feel like for a lot of people, there's just that sort of underlying current that has been fed to us from really early on. For some people, I find that, and I believe there is research to back this up, but I believe that for some people, slowing down can fully trigger a trauma response. And I think, and I'm sure you can all think of someone in your life, whether it's yourself or someone that you know, someone that you're close with, or just someone that you see, from an observing perspective, where you can tell they are busy all the time. They love to keep themselves busy. They might even acknowledge that. And you might get this sense where you're like, oh, you keep yourself busy as a form of avoidance. You might get that sense. Or maybe not. Maybe this is the first time you've heard of being busy and avoidance being used in the same context, right? So I do see a lot of particularly clients who, their body's communicating with them through symptoms that they're uncomfortable with. That they're not happy that they're having these symptoms. And at the same time, they're so busy across their work life, their family life, their social life, hobbies, things like that. And it always makes me wonder, what are we avoiding here? Because it's probably the thing that you're avoiding that your body is trying to bring attention to. And unfortunately, the thing that you're avoiding is probably something from your past that was traumatic, that your body and your brain hasn't fully processed. And so when there's stillness and slowness, when we stop being busy, that's when our mind will bring it to the surface, will bring any traumatic memories or difficult feelings to the surface. Hey, oh, cool, we've got a spare second. Process these. And the conscious mind, the cerebral mind, I'm using very loose language here from a neurological perspective, so forgive me. But I guess if it's the subconscious mind wanting to bring up the past memories, the difficult feelings, I would say it would be the ego and the conscious mind that's like, no, this is uncomfortable. And I've worked with some clients where they've been brave enough to unpack this. I've hopefully created a safe enough space where they were happy to unpack this with me or with a therapist that they work with, where once they get to the root of it, of like, what are you avoiding and why are you avoiding it? And sometimes it's just one emotion, you know, and whether we pin it back to a memory or not, you know, it's still valid. The body's feeling it for a reason. And what I find is if we go to, okay, well, what's the worst thing that can happen if you feel that emotion or if you face that emotion or that memory? And for some people, and even they can say in the moment, this sounds irrational, but I feel like I'm going to die. So when we see it from that perspective, our brain and our nervous system is trying to protect us because there is a legitimate fear of death, that we won't survive confronting the difficult stuff. So we keep busy. We keep busy in the real world. We keep busy with our external lives. And hang on, is that all the reasons I want to say? So trained into us, avoiding something. And I guess another reason is that we don't know how to slow down. We don't know what that looks like. And again, I guess that links into the first reason of like being trained to work hard and stay busy. And that's like the norm. So then it's hard to know what the opposite of that is or how to manage that in a cyclical way. How do we balance exertion and then coming back to ourselves and retreating for a little bit? How do we, you know, we're not taught that. So like fair enough, right? And so the thing, now infusing some menstrual cycle awareness into this, our luteal phases, so our pre-menstrual phases after you ovulate and before you get your next period, so from a really general point of view, from mid-cycle until your next period, energetically, that is the time when your subconscious, your soul, your spirit, however, there's a lot of different ways you could word that, wants to feel the feelings, wants to explore the deep, dark places of your psyche and process things. It wants to acknowledge all the shit in your life, past and present, and it wants to deal with it. And obviously there can be solutions to problems, right? But usually it just wants to feel it first, or feeling it, even if you've got a solution, feeling the energy of the problem and the emotion behind the problem is usually a part of the process. And unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, but I really do honor feelings and appreciate how they can help us and how they can help us grow and develop as humans. But usually feeling the feelings is going to come first, even if you've got a solution. It's like that. I'm sure I could reference someone for this quote, and I apologize that I can't do that off the top of my head. But you know, the way out is through is a really great way to sort of summarize this energy. The way out is through. So you're experiencing discomfort. You're not happy with your life on a broader level when you really have the time to sort of think about it, or, you know, it might be when you go to bed. And I know that sounds kind of dark and morbid, but like, I'm here for it. I hope you're here for it. I'm just talking about real things. And so it's like, yeah, when we're not happy with something, and the way that we process that we work through that discomfort is by feeling it, by feeling the underlying, usually it's going to be a fear. There might be a limiting belief. There might be self-doubt. And that is one of the superpowers, or the shadows, depending on how you look at it. That is one of the superpowers of the luteal phase. We are more in a feeling state. We are more sensitive to emotions. Our intuition might be more turned on, tuned in. And just off that, something else I find, speaking of, you know, like intuition being more turned on and activated during the luteal phase, I recently did a podcast interview with Jacinta Barbagallo of Karinda Women's Health. That's coming out soon, by the way. And we were talking about clients who talk about their premenstrual phase, talk about their luteal phase and go, oh my God, I was so irrational. Like I was fighting with my partner and I couldn't believe how I was feeling and what I was thinking. And I felt crazy. I felt like someone else. And what I was reacting to was just so over the top. And that's definitely one way of looking at it. And that's definitely a way that I think the mainstream would look at it. And we even see that in media, being portrayed in media, you know, PMS makes people crazy and stuff like that. But it's like, if I could offer an alternative perspective, potentially, that could be of benefit to us rather than just believing that we're crazy because of our hormones. What if, because your feelings are more sensitive in your luteal phase, what if because your intuition is more tuned in and turned on in your luteal phase? What if you were just less tolerant of bullshit? What if your intuition just makes stuff that you are no longer willing to tolerate known? What if your intuition is trying to show you the ultimate truth? And the other thing about that, truth will often be uncomfortable. Another quote, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Yeah. Yeah, it happens. And again, that's usually just part of the way through feeling the feelings, acknowledging the truth. Now, all of this is easier said than done. So I highly recommend working with someone through this, whether you have some really good and supportive and trustworthy people in your inner circle that are open to having these conversations. But sometimes it feels too close to home talking about it with someone you know. And that's when I recommend seeking out a practitioner, a therapist, and someone that works for you. There's a lot of different modalities out there. Don't think that only one can help you. And you know, regardless of what's worked for anyone else. For context, in my sessions, I go through, I'm just very holistic. So we look at all systems of the body, even though I do have a specific focus and interest on menstrual cycles and reproductive health and hormonal health. And then I also infuse this menstrual cycle awareness into it, where we do get to process things from an energetic menstrual cycle perspective. And because I am really holistic, we talk about the emotions of it. I'm not a therapist. I am trained in counseling and some very mild psychology. And it's also just, psychology is just one of my big interests. So I guess a little bit of it comes quite naturally. But there's room to talk about that with me. Just in case you're hearing this and you're a client of mine and maybe we haven't cracked that barrier of like talking about the emotional experiences or talking about what lies beneath the symptoms, and maybe you haven't felt ready yet, or you haven't felt comfortable enough, or you didn't know. I think this is what happens with most people. You didn't know that that was an option to be explored, especially in the context of a naturopathy session. So I'm just letting you know, for the record, to clarify, that is something that I'm very happy to support you through. And so resistance to rest. What happens when we say yes to rest? Because everything I just said, you know, about processing, feeling the feelings, that is a lot of energy for our body to hold. And especially if you are delving back into traumatic memories. And again, I hope you do that with the guidance and support of a qualified practitioner. But doing that is so much for the body to go through. That is consuming energy on a cellular level and on a very energetic level as well. And that can be exhausting. And I often find that if someone's been working hard and pushing through for a really long time, once they sort of hit that awakening point, maybe that's not the best word for it, but once they see the truth, I guess, it's like there's no turning back, and they usually go through a period of like deep rest or like radical change, you know, taking long service leave off work, going on a holiday, going somewhere else, staying somewhere else from their normal environment for a bit. Things can really change. And I mean, that's usually also what's required if we've been doing something for so long and then we realize something new. and then it's a lot for our body to process, we usually need a change of environment in that, because we can't get well in the same environment that made us sick. Another good quote. So many good quotes in this one. So once we acknowledge that rest is required, what are the runoff benefits from that? Well, again, to bring it back to menstrual cycle awareness, a core part of being aware of our cycles, the cycles of nature and our own menstrual cycles, is acknowledging that one phase of the cycle will influence the next phase. And that sort of flows on as a domino effect. And then beyond that, we also acknowledge that one whole cycle can affect the next cycle after that, and the next cycle after that, and the next cycle after that. And so then we start to see that it's like, okay, we've got these cycles. We need to find the opportunity to break these cycles and these patterns if we're stuck in this loop of work, stay busy, stay busy, stay busy, avoid feelings, avoid feelings, avoid feelings. And thank you, cycles, for having natural points where it's a good time to slow down and practice that, and where it will feel easier for our bodies to slow down when it's something new that we're learning. Because it honestly, slowing down is almost just like another skill. Like, it's something that we have to practice, and it might not come easily at first. So my favorite times to slow down in the menstrual cycle are the luteal phase and the menstrual phase. To break that down a little bit, luteal phase, now this is going to be different for everyone, especially if you experience PMS, because you can experience PMS from the end of ovulation up until your next period, like the whole fortnight, or you can experience maybe 1 or 2 days right before your bleed, or maybe a week before your bleed. So it's different for everyone. But for me, I like to prioritize slowing down about a week out from my period. If it's a really busy cycle for me, if it's a really busy month, maybe at least 3 days before my period. And sometimes it might even be a matter of, there's like maybe a week out from my period, I'm feeling the intensity of it all. I'm feeling the irritability kick in. That's usually the first signal for me that, like, okay, we are well into the luteal phase. We need to start taking it easy, and we need to up our nourishment game. So start slowing down, start resting, make sure you're feeding yourself well, sleeping a little bit more if you need to, things like that. Managing social and work expectations, things like that. So so sometimes I might need to do it like for 1 day, and I go really hard with slowing down one day, but I'm still like 6 days out from my period. And then I feel like I've got another few days where I'm like, oh, okay, feeling more balanced, feeling more stable, until, 1 or 2 days before my bleed. So again, that's just a snapshot example of how I experience it sometimes. And I find that especially in the long term, and especially if you've experienced chronic menstrual pain or discomfort, when you start to slow down before the period, you will notice a difference in your periods. And look, usually there's a lot of factors involved. Not a lot, but usually it's more than one factor involved. I mean, to just quickly riff off a few, like when it comes to period pain, dysmenorrhea, we're usually looking at some degree of nutrient deficiencies, some degree of dysregulated inflammation in the body, maybe a hyper alert immune system or a suppressed immune system, or we're looking at adjacent digestive issues that flare up at the time of menses because of the hormonal fluctuations, things like that, and they contribute to the menstrual discomfort. So obviously, we address it all. I address it all, or at least that's my aim. But if I just addressed those physical factors without encouraging and supporting my clients in slowing down in their luteal phase, honestly, I'm not sure how much of a sustainable difference I could achieve for my clients. I think we could sort of, shift some things a bit, or maybe at first, they're taking like a really great magnesium and mineral complex for the first time in their life. So their body's getting this dose of something that they really needed, that they were really depleted in. So they feel a huge difference, maybe for their next 2 or 3 cycles, but then the period pain returns because the lifestyle hasn't changed. The mindset hasn't changed about what the period pain is communicating in the first place, if that makes sense. So we can't do the physical therapies for chronic period pain without acknowledging rest and lifestyle. And then the other phase that I love to focus on rest in is obviously, you probably guessed it, the menstrual phase. So once the period actually starts. Now, nuance there is that I find that some people, and it can switch between cycles, even for the one person, but I find that mostly people will either feel more intense in their luteal phase or more intense in their menstrual phase. And so for my clients who feel one or the other, who feel more intense in one phase over the other, and who don't have the life flexibility or the scheduling flexibility to slow down in both, I go, okay, reflect within yourself which time in your cycle usually feels more intense, and let's prioritize slowing down for that. So that's just a little bit of nuance between the luteal and the menstrual phase there. But yeah, for the menstrual phase, actually slowing down. For me, it's the first and second day of my period that I'm like, oh, I really need to go inwards. And again, acknowledging that one phase is going to influence the next phase. So what you do in a present time menstrual phase is going to affect your follicular phase for that cycle. And then it could affect your ovulation for that cycle. And then your luteal phase, and it could affect your premenstrual experience. And that could then run off into your next cycle, your next menstrual phase. So even if you're having not a particularly intense period, that is still your body's innate time for rest. It is like an inbuilt cue. Menstruation is an inbuilt cue in your body, in our cyclical system, to say, hey, slow down. So for me, yep, it's the first couple of days where I just really need a retreat, pull back a little bit. And usually when I really lean in on day 1 of my cycle when I'm bleeding, by day 2, unless there's like a lot of stress going on for me, by day 2, I'm like, I'm ready to go back into the world, but I'll still take my time because that's just me and that's what I prefer. And I think that's what's best for me in the long run. Usually, definitely by day 3, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. Everything's a little bit more clear. My brain is like switched back on in like a different way, and I can really like engage with the world. And again, this might be quicker for you. This might be longer for you, meet yourself where you're at would be my advice there. And I guess just some suggestions for, nourishing yourself more deeply in each phase. So for the luteal phase, remember, during this time, your body literally needs more nutrition, a little bit more calories at this time. Because of what progesterone is doing in your body after ovulation, your metabolism is higher, so the input needs to be higher. When the input isn't higher to accommodate for the hormonal changes, that's where we can see really intense premenstrual cravings or mood swings, blood sugar imbalances, things like that. Or any other sort of, any other sign of like a hormonal deficiency because we're not putting enough into our body. So making sure you're eating enough. Blood sugar, so our insulin can be a little bit more resistant. No, that's not how I say that. Our cells can be a little bit more resistant to insulin during our luteal phase, again, just because of metabolic changes in our body as our body's preparing for a potential pregnancy. So I really encourage higher protein intake during this time. Even if you've got those sweet cravings and you're going for it, that's okay. I don't like depriving people of things. Just make sure there's a sufficient protein in there because that's going to be a total game changer for your blood sugar and probably for any premenstrual symptoms that you get as well. Truth be told. And depending on what your exercise regimen, depending on what your exercise regimen is during this time or just in general, for the luteal phase, I highly recommend more of a focus on slower strength training, focusing on muscle mass, because the more muscle mass we have, the less resistant our cells are to insulin. And that means we have more stable blood sugar, happier, more balanced moods, more balanced energy levels, better sleeps at night, etc. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you the runoff effect that can have on your mental health and your general sense of wellness in your life. In terms of the menstrual phase, what you can do to support slowing down there, if you are cycle tracking in a way where you're tracking ovulation accurately, again, not based on an app. If you use an app that says you ovulated at this time, and you didn't input any biomarkers or, data from your own body, like temperatures or cervical fluid readings or cervical position readings or LH test readings or progesterone tests, that the app doesn't know whether you've ovulated or not. So if you are accurately tracking ovulation, you can look ahead to 2 weeks from when you ovulated and go, okay, I have a pretty good idea that that's when my period's going to arrive. How can I plan for that? And it's going to look different for everyone depending on what you do for work, what your life looks like in general, if you're a parent or not. Now, I will say my experience is that of someone who isn't a parent, other than to a kelpie and a cat, and sometimes a boyfriend. No, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't joke about that. You know how it is. So forgive me if, to any parents listening, I always attempt to empathize with how different your life is once you're a parent, but I don't know it from lived experience. So some of my suggestions might seem totally out of your realm, totally inaccessible, and I just want to, I don't necessarily want to say sorry for that, I just want to acknowledge that, because I know that these suggestions will be able to help some people. So yeah, for me, I track ovulation, I look ahead to when I'll be bleeding, and I'll block off a couple of days of work, especially if I'm meant to be seeing clients on the days that the period is expected. So I'll block off work. If I have work that's booked in that is for whatever reason unavoidable, I'll just make sure that I've got sufficient breaks in the day. And if that includes client work, I'll make sure that there's chunky gaps between clients. Just, again, giving myself space to breathe, giving myself space to slow down. This might also look like, in my world, communicating with my partner, saying, hey, whether it's beforehand or during, hey, I'm in my menstrual phase, here's where I'm at, here's the day that I'm on. I won't be able to walk the dog today or tomorrow. Like, I really just need to look after myself. Also, that could also involve, are you able to cook dinner or like cook a big meal so I'll be able to have leftovers while I'm bleeding and taking it easy? Little things like that. Maybe they sound like big things, maybe they sound like little things. Meet yourself where you're at. Change it to suit your circumstances, hey? Something I really like to do in my luteal phase, when I've still got, nice sufficient energy, I'll really like to meal prep for myself. So I've got some good, easy to prepare food for when I'm bleeding, because if I'm not nourishing myself during that time, honestly, it's probably going to be a worse experience. And again, even if it doesn't feel worse in the moment, it could have a runoff effect on the rest of your cycle. One cycle affects the next. That's why it's important to look after ourselves right now, wherever we are at. And as always, I say with the menstrual phase, focusing on really warming foods, easy to digest foods, no super cold or raw things, just ensuring that it's super easy for our body to digest whatever we're putting in. And if you experience iron deficiency, that's a great time to focus on iron-rich foods as well. So I think that's all I have to say today. So to summarize, do you have a resistance to rest? Posing the question, putting the question out there, is it possible that your resistance to rest could be causing your menstrual problems, your period problems, your hormonal imbalances, or your general health concerns, or your mental health concerns? Could your body be trying to shed light on an innate wisdom that you hold, that there is a benefit to resting and slowing down, particularly at certain times of your cycle, so that you can find more balance in your life and feel a little bit more flow and actually get to the bottom of your health concerns? Just throwing that out there, just some thoughts for today. If you have any questions or feels or anything, feel free to share. I guess I should also say, hey, if you like this podcast, rate the podcast. Give me a rating. You can drop me a line at Instagram at karinda.holistics. You can also send me an email if you're interested in working with me in any way, or if you're interested in any of the resources I have. There's plenty on my website, karindaholistics.com.au. Thank you for joining me for another episode, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Oh My Menses. If you have a special request of something you'd like to hear me talk about, or you have any questions that you want to ask me, please drop me a line at hello@karindaholistics.com.au. I would like to acknowledge the land and country on which I live, work and create, that of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I honour their connection to land, sea, flora and fauna across this country. I pay my respects to the elders of these communities, past, present and forthcoming.